The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with the characteristic sounds of a dozen different species conducting their daily business. Ambassador Kethvar of the Zephyrian Empire adjusted his crystalline respirator and cast another dismissive glance at the small figure seated at the far end of the semicircular table. The human representative, Dr. Elena Vasquez, appeared almost comically fragile among the assembled delegates. Her pale skin seemed translucent under the harsh artificial lighting, and her slight frame made her look like a child playing dress-up in diplomatic robes. The motion before us today concerns the proposed human colony expansion into the Dracmore sector, announced Chancellor Vree, his 6 arms gesturing elegantly as he spoke. The insectoid leader's mandibles clicked with authority as he continued. However, given recent intelligence reports about the sector's hostile environment, we must question whether humanity possesses the physical capabilities necessary for such an undertaking. A ripple of agreement swept through the chamber. The Corallian delegate, whose rocky exterior resembled living granite, rumbled his approval. The Dracmore sector experiences solar flares that would cook most species alive. The gravitational anomalies alone would crush human bones to powder. Dr. Vasquez remained silent, her dark eyes fixed on a holographic display showing the contested sector. The image rotated slowly, revealing a cluster of resource-rich worlds orbiting a volatile star. The data streams scrolling beside the projection painted a picture of immense danger. Radiation levels that fluctuated wildly, gravity fields that could shift without warning, and atmospheric conditions that range from scorching heat to absolute zero within hours. Furthermore, added Ambassador Kethvar, his voice dripping with condescension, humans have demonstrated time and again that they are perhaps the most fragile species ever admitted to this council. No natural armor, no environmental adaptations, no enhanced healing capabilities. They require constant life support systems just to survive in normal space environments. The Aquarian delegate, her gill slits fluttering with what might have been amusement, joined the chorus of doubt. My species has observed human colonization efforts for the past 50 years. They consistently require extensive terraforming, protective habitats, and regular supply runs from their homeworld. How could such delicate beings possibly survive in Dracmore's hellish conditions? Dr. Vasquez finally stood, her movement so graceful and controlled that it momentarily silenced the chamber. When she spoke, her voice was calm and measured, carrying none of the defensive anger that many expected. Honored delegates, I appreciate your concerns for human welfare. Your observations about our apparent physical limitations are not without merit from your perspectives. She paused, allowing her gaze to meet each delegate's eyes in turn. However, there are aspects of human physiology and capability that may not be immediately apparent to your species' sensory arrays. Chancellor Vree leaned forward, his compound eyes glittering with curiosity. Are you suggesting that humans possess hidden adaptations? Our medical scans have been quite thorough, Dr. Vasquez. We have found no evidence of enhanced durability, environmental resistance, or regenerative capabilities beyond the most basic cellular repair mechanisms. A thin smile played across Elena's lips. Medical scans can only reveal what is actively manifesting. The human genome carries ancient sequences, dormant code, that activates only under extreme duress. Our ancestors called it many things across different cultures, but the concept remained consistent, the fire that sleeps within us all. The Corallian delegate's laugh sounded like grinding stone. Fire? You speak in metaphors, human. The Dracmore sector requires concrete biological advantages, not poetry. Perhaps a demonstration would be more convincing than words, Elena replied, her tone remaining perfectly composed even as several delegates exchanged worried glances. The human had made no threatening gestures, issued no challenges, yet something in her bearing had shifted. An almost imperceptible change in posture, a subtle alteration in the way she held her head. Before anyone could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. The chamber's main display flickered to life, showing feeds from external sensors. A massive Void Reaper, one of the galaxy's most feared predatory species, had somehow breached the station's outer defenses. The creature was easily the size of a small frigate, its biomechanical structure bristling with natural weapons that could tear through starship hulls. Impossible, breathed the Aquarian delegate. The defense grid should have detected it light years away. Chancellor Vria's 6 arms moved in a blur as he activated emergency protocols. All diplomatic personnel are to proceed immediately to the secure bunkers on Level 7. Security teams report to defensive positions. The assembled delegates began filing out of the chamber with varying degrees of urgency, their natural flight responses kicking in. The Corallian moved with surprising speed despite his bulk, while the Zephyrians activated personal shield generators. Only Dr. Vasquez remained motionless, her eyes closed as if listening to something only she could hear. Dr. Vasquez, Chancellor Vri called out, his voice tight with concern. You must evacuate immediately. Your species lacks the natural defenses to survive if that creature breaches the inner hull. Elena's eyes opened, and, for just a moment, Vri could have sworn they reflected light like a cat's eyes in the dark. Chancellor, with respect, you may want to reconsider your assumptions about human limitations. The station shuddered as the Void Reaper's feeding tentacles made contact with the outer hull. These creatures were known to drain the life force from anything they touched, converting biological energy into fuel for their own grotesque existence. The emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across the chamber as power fluctuated. The creature is through the first barrier, announced the station's AI in its maddeningly calm voice. Estimate 17 minutes until it reaches the diplomatic quarters. Elena walked to the chamber's main viewport, pressing her palm against the transparent aluminum. In the distance, she could see the Void Reaper's bioluminescent displays pulsing with predatory hunger. The creature had already begun extending its neural networks into the station systems, seeking to override life support and security measures. Fascinating, she murmured, seemingly oblivious to the chaos around her. I've never encountered one of these before. The genetic structure is remarkably complex, almost as if it were engineered rather than evolved. Dr. Vasquez, please, Vri pleaded, his usual diplomatic composure cracking. This is not the time for scientific curiosity. That thing will kill everything on this station if it isn't stopped. Elena turned back to face him, and this time there was no mistaking the change in her eyes. They had taken on a golden hue that seemed to pulse with internal light. You're absolutely right, Chancellor. It will kill everything on this station. She began walking toward the chamber's exit, but instead of heading toward the evacuation routes, she moved in the direction of the Void Reaper's entry point. Unless, of course, someone stops it first. The security teams are already engaging, Vri called after her. Their weapons can't even penetrate its hide. Dr. Vasquez, where are you going? Elena paused at the threshold, looking back over her shoulder. When she smiled, Vri noticed that her teeth seemed sharper than they had been moments before. I'm going to introduce myself to our unwelcome guest. After all, it's only polite. The temperature in the chamber seemed to rise noticeably after she left, though the environmental systems showed no malfunction. Chancellor Vri stood alone, staring at the viewport where the Void Reaper continued its methodical advance through the station's superstructure. For the first time in his long diplomatic career, he found himself hoping that he had been completely wrong about a species' capabilities. In the corridors beyond, Dr. Elena Vasquez moved through the emergency-lit passages with purpose. The dormant code in her DNA was awakening, sequences that had been passed down through countless generations of humans who had faced impossible odds and somehow survived. Her ancestors had called it by many names: Berserker Rage, Divine Fury, the Dragon's Fire. Modern science had tried to explain it as an extreme stress response, an evolutionary adaptation that allowed humans to access reserves of strength and resilience that defied conventional understanding. The truth, Elena knew, was both simpler and more profound than either mythology or science could fully capture. Humanity had survived the rise and fall of civilizations, natural disasters that reshaped continents, and predators that should have driven them to extinction. They had not merely survived. They had thrived, spreading across their homeworld and, eventually, to the stars. That kind of success didn't come from being fragile. As she moved deeper into the station, Elena could feel the change accelerating. Her heart rate had increased, but instead of the rapid, panicked rhythm of fear, it was the steady, powerful drumbeat of a predator preparing for battle. Her muscles felt different, denser somehow, as if her very cellular structure was shifting to accommodate new demands. The first security team she encountered was retreating in disorder, their energy weapons having proved useless against the Void Reaper's adaptive hide. The squad leader, a grizzled Corallian veteran, grabbed her arm as she passed. "Civilian, you need to get to the evacuation zones immediately. That thing is tearing through our defenses like they're made of paper." Elena gently but firmly removed his rocky grip from her arm. "I understand your concern, Sergeant, but I think you'll find that your weapons are simply inadequate for this particular threat." Before the sergeant could respond, Elena was moving again, leaving him staring after her in confusion. There had been something in her voice, an undertone that spoke of absolute confidence in the face of impossible odds. It reminded him of stories his grandfather used to tell about the ancient stone shapers, warriors of his people who could reshape reality with will alone. Elena reached the breach point just as the Void Reaper finished dissolving the final barrier between itself and the station's interior. The creature was even more impressive up close, its bioengineered structure a nightmarish fusion of living tissue and mechanical components. Sensory organs dotted its surface like malevolent eyes, constantly scanning for new sources of life energy to consume. It noticed her immediately, its attention drawn by the complex electromagnetic patterns that all sentient beings generated. What it found, however, was unlike any prey it had encountered in its long existence. The small figure standing before it radiated energy signatures that fluctuated wildly, as if multiple different life forms were somehow contained within a single body. Elena stepped forward, and her voice carried clearly through the corrupted atmosphere. "Hello there, beautiful. I have to say, you're quite impressive, but I'm afraid you've made a mistake coming here." The Void Reaper responded as its nature demanded, extending feeding tentacles toward this new source of potential energy. What happened next would be recorded by the station's internal sensors and become the subject of intense study for decades to come. As the creature's tentacles made contact with Elena's skin, her body erupted in flames that burned with colors no natural fire should possess. Golden flames shot through with veins of deep crimson danced along her arms and shoulders, but instead of consuming her, they seemed to be an extension of her will. The temperature readings from the sensors spiked beyond their calibrated limits. The Void Reaper recoiled, its tentacles smoking where they had touched the impossible fire. For the first time in its existence, it had encountered prey that burned it back. Elena took another step forward, and the flames around her intensified. "You see," she said conversationally, as if discussing the weather rather than facing down a creature that had destroyed entire colonies. "Humans have this funny little quirk in our genetics. We carry the memory of dragons in our blood. Most of the time, it sleeps quietly, letting us live normal, peaceful lives. But sometimes when we're faced with something truly threatening to what we care about, it wakes up." The fire spread across her entire body now, wreathing her in an aura of heat and light that turned the corridor into a miniature sun. The Void Reaper's sensors were going haywire, unable to process what they were detecting. This small, fragile creature was somehow generating energy levels that rivaled a fusion reactor. Elena raised her hand, and the flames gathered around her fingers like living things eager to serve. The really interesting part is what happens next. The Void Reaper's shriek of rage and confusion echoed through the station's corridors as it faced something its ancient predatory instincts had never prepared it for. The creature had evolved over millennia to drain life energy from its victims, converting their biological essence into fuel for its own continued existence. But the small human standing before it was not losing energy. She was generating it at an exponential rate. Elena Vasquez stood, wreathed in flames that defied every law of physics the galactic scientific community thought they understood. The fire didn't consume oxygen, didn't generate smoke, and didn't follow conventional thermodynamics. Instead, it pulsed with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat, growing brighter with each passing second. "You know," Elena said, her voice carrying an odd note of scholarly fascination even as golden flames danced around her words, "I've always wondered what would happen if I really let go. My grandmother used to tell stories about our ancestors, about the fire that burned in their hearts when they faced the impossible. I thought they were just metaphors." The Void Reaper launched itself forward, its massive bulk filling the corridor as it sought to overwhelm this strange prey through sheer size and ferocity. Its feeding appendages extended like a forest of grasping tentacles, each one capable of draining the life from a dozen beings simultaneously. Elena didn't retreat. Instead, she stepped into the creature's charge, her hands reaching out to meet the oncoming mass of bioengineered death. When her fingers made contact with the Void Reaper's hide, the effect was immediate and devastating. The creature's scream, this time, was pure agony as the fire spread from Elena's touch across its surface. But this wasn't ordinary combustion. The flames seemed to be rewriting the creature's very existence at a molecular level. Where the fire touched, the Void Reaper's adaptive armor began to crystallize, transforming from flexible biometal into something that resembled volcanic glass. "Fascinating," Elena murmured, pressing both palms against the creature's thrashing form. "You're not entirely organic, are you? There's artificial programming in your cellular structure, quantum-level modifications that allow for rapid adaptation. Someone built you to be the perfect predator." The Void Reaper tried to withdraw, its survival instincts finally overriding its hunting protocols. But Elena's grip was unnaturally strong, her fingers sinking into its hide like molten metal into soft wax. The creature found itself unable to break free from contact with its supposed prey. Throughout the station, the assembled diplomatic delegates huddled in their emergency shelters, watching the encounter unfold through security feeds. Chancellor Vree stood transfixed before the main display, his compound eyes struggling to process what his instruments were telling him. "The energy readings are impossible," whispered his chief science officer, a cerebellian whose massive cranium housed one of the galaxy's most advanced analytical minds. "The human is somehow generating power levels equivalent to a stellar core reaction, but there's no radiation signature, no particle emissions. It's as if she's pulling energy from somewhere outside our dimensional framework." Ambassador Kethvar of the Zephyrian Empire watched in stunned silence as the human he had dismissed as fragile systematically dismantled a creature that could have torn apart their entire fleet. "This changes everything," he breathed, his crystalline features reflecting the golden light emanating from the security feed. "If humans possess this kind of capability, why have they hidden it? Why present themselves as weak when they clearly have access to power that rivals our most advanced technologies?" The Aquarian delegate's gill slits fluttered rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation in her species. Perhaps they weren't hiding it. Perhaps they simply didn't know they could do this until now. Back in the corridor, Elena was discovering the limits of her newfound abilities through direct experimentation. The fire that surrounded her body seemed to respond to her will, intensifying when she focused on specific areas of the Void Reaper's form. More intriguingly, she found she could direct the energy with precision, targeting the creature's artificial components while leaving its organic tissues relatively unharmed. "You're in pain," she observed, her voice taking on a gentler tone as she noticed the creature's struggles becoming weaker. "The artificial modifications in your system are fighting against your natural biology. Someone did this to you, didn't they? Turned you into a weapon against your will." For the first time since the encounter began, The Void Reaper stopped trying to escape. Its multiple sensory organs focused on Elena with something approaching recognition rather than predatory hunger. Deep in its modified brain, memories that had been suppressed by layers of artificial programming began to surface. Elena felt the change in the creature's bioelectric field and adjusted her approach accordingly. Instead of using the fire to destroy, she began using it to heal. The golden flames flowed over the Void Reaper's surface like liquid light, seeking out the quantum-level modifications and carefully dismantling them. "That's it," she encouraged softly. "Let me help you remember who you were before they changed you." The process was neither quick nor simple. The artificial modifications had been integrated into the creature's cellular structure with diabolic cleverness, designed to be nearly impossible to remove without killing the host. But Elena's fire wasn't bound by conventional limitations. It operated on principles that transcended normal physics, allowing her to edit reality at the most fundamental level. As the modifications dissolved under her touch, the Void Reaper's true form began to emerge. What had appeared to be a nightmarish fusion of living tissue and mechanical components was revealed to be something far more tragic, a member of an ancient species that had been extinct for thousands of years, artificially preserved and perverted into an instrument of destruction. The celestial shepherds had been known throughout the galaxy for their wisdom and their ability to nurture life on dead worlds. Their natural empathic abilities had made them beloved by countless species, and their disappearance had been mourned as one of the great losses in galactic history. The truth, Elena realized as her flames continued their work, was far darker than anyone had suspected. "They didn't go extinct," she whispered, her eyes wide with horror and revelation. "Someone harvested them, turned them into weapons, and let the galaxy believe they had died out naturally." The creature, no longer the Void Reaper, but something approaching its original form, looked at Elena with eyes that held intelligence and gratitude. Its feeding appendages had transformed back into the delicate sensory tendrils that the celestial shepherds had used to commune with plant life. The predatory hunger that had driven its actions was gone, replaced by the gentle curiosity that had been its species-defining characteristic. Elena stepped back, the flames around her body beginning to subside now that the immediate threat had passed. She felt drained in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion, as if the process of unlocking and using her abilities had drawn from reserves of energy she hadn't known she possessed. "I'm sorry," she told the transformed creature. "I'm sorry for what they did to you, and I'm sorry for what you were forced to become." The being that had once been called a Void Reaper approached her slowly, its movements now graceful rather than predatory. When it reached her, it extended one of its sensory tendrils in a gesture that Elena somehow understood was an expression of profound gratitude. The moment their minds touched, Elena was flooded with images and memories spanning millennia. She saw the celestial shepherds at the height of their civilization, tending vast gardens that spanned entire continents. She witnessed their capture by entities that existed in the spaces between dimensions, beings that fed on suffering and delighted in perverting beauty into horror. But she also saw something else, a vast network of similar creatures scattered throughout the galaxy, all of them former celestial shepherds who had been transformed against their will into instruments of destruction. The being before her was just one of hundreds, possibly thousands, who were trapped in artificial forms and compelled to spread death and fear wherever they went. "We have to help them," Elena said, her voice hoarse from the psychic contact. "All of them. We can't leave them like this." The transformed shepherd communicated its agreement through a complex pattern of bioluminescent displays across its surface. It had retained memories of its fellow survivors and could guide efforts to locate and restore them. But such a task would require resources and cooperation on a scale that the galactic community had never attempted. Elena turned toward the security cameras she knew were recording everything, addressing the delegates she couldn't see but knew were watching. I suppose we need to have a conversation about what humans are really capable of, don't we? As if summoned by her words, Chancellor Vri appeared at the far end of the corridor, flanked by a full security detail and medical team. The insectoid leader approached slowly, his usual diplomatic composure replaced by open amazement. "Dr. Vasquez," he said carefully, "I believe we owe you several apologies. And, perhaps more importantly, we owe your entire species a significant reassessment of our assumptions." Elena nodded wearily, feeling the last of the flames fade from her skin. "The fire is dormant again," she explained. "It only manifests when there's a genuine threat to something I care about. Most humans live their entire lives without ever accessing it. But the potential is there," Vri observed. "In all of you. In some of us, yes. The genetic markers aren't universal, but they're more common than you might think. We call them throwbacks, atavistic traits that surface unpredictably in our population. Most of the time, they manifest as unusual strength or resilience in crisis situations. What happened here was more extreme than usual." The restored celestial shepherd moved to stand beside Elena, its presence serving as living proof of what human abilities could accomplish when properly applied. The creature's transformation from a galaxy-feared predator into a being of obvious intelligence and gentleness had implications that went far beyond the immediate crisis. "There are others," Elena continued, gesturing to her new companion. "Hundreds of them, scattered throughout known space, still trapped in forms that were forced upon them. The entities responsible for their transformation are still out there, still creating new horrors from captured sentience." Ambassador Kethvar arrived with the rest of the diplomatic party, his crystalline features reflecting a complex mix of emotions. "Dr. Vasquez, on behalf of the Zephyrian Empire, I formally withdraw our objections to human expansion into the Drakmor sector. In fact, I would like to propose that humanity be offered full military partnership status in the Galactic Defense Alliance." "With respect, Ambassador," Elena replied, "I think we might want to aim higher than that. What I've shown you today isn't an exception among humans. It's a reminder of what we're all capable of when we need to be. And, right now, the galaxy needs protectors who can face threats that conventional weapons can't touch." The Aquarian delegate stepped forward, her gill slits still fluttering with excitement. "Are you suggesting that humans could serve as a specialized force for dealing with supernatural or extra-dimensional threats?" Elena smiled, and this time there was nothing fragile about the expression. "I'm suggesting that maybe it's time for the galaxy to stop thinking of humans as the species that needs protection. We've been quiet about our capabilities because we hope we'd never need to use them. But if there are more creatures like our friend here, suffering in artificial forms, and if there are entities out there creating them, then the time for being subtle has passed." The transformed celestial shepherd pulsed with agreement, its bioluminescent patterns creating a light show that seemed to convey complex emotions. Through their psychic link, Elena could feel its eagerness to begin the work of liberation, to free its transformed kin from their imposed prison of predatory instinct. Chancellor Vri looked around at his fellow delegates, seeing his own thoughts reflected in their expressions. "Dr. Vasquez, I believe it's time we discussed forming an entirely new type of alliance, one that recognizes the true nature of the threats we face and the equally extraordinary nature of humanity's potential contributions to galactic security." Elena nodded, already beginning to formulate plans that went far beyond simple colony expansion. "I'll need to contact my homeworld, brief them on what's happened here. There are others among my people who carry the dormant traits, others who've been preparing for the day when humanity might need to step forward as guardians rather than protected wards." As the group began moving toward the main conference chamber, the implications of the day's events settled over them like a heavy blanket. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted fundamentally, not through conquest or political maneuvering, but through the revelation of capabilities that had been hidden in plain sight. Elena walked alongside her transformed companion, already planning their first rescue mission. The galaxy was about to discover that humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology or their diplomacy. It was their willingness to burn themselves, to light the way for others, to become the fire that drives back the darkness when all other lights have failed. 6 months after the incident at the diplomatic station, the galaxy had become a very different place. The formation of the Draconic Guard, humanity's elite force of fire-wielding protectors, had sent shockwaves through every major civilization. What had once been dismissed as the weakest species in the galactic community now commanded respect that bordered on reverence. Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Prometheus Rising, watching through the main viewport as her team prepared for their most ambitious rescue operation yet. Spread across the view screen were the coordinates of 17 different locations where transformed celestial shepherds had been detected. Each one represented a being that had been tortured and perverted by entities that existed in the spaces between dimensions. Commander reported her second-in-command, Marcus Chun, his own latent abilities manifesting as an aura of controlled heat that made the air around him shimmer. The strike teams are in position. We've confirmed the presence of transformed shepherds at all 17 sites. Elena nodded, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. In the months since her awakening, she had discovered that her abilities were far from unique among humans. The dormant genetic sequences existed in approximately 1 in every 1,000 individuals, waiting for the right combination of stress, purpose, and necessity to activate. The Draconic Guard now numbered nearly 50,000 active members, with more awakening their abilities every day. "Any sign of the Void Makers?" she asked, using the name they had given to the extra-dimensional entities responsible for the Shepherd's transformation. "Negative on direct contact," Chin replied, his expression grim. "But the dimensional readings are off the charts at 3 of the locations. Our scientists think they might be feeding stations where the Void Makers harvest the psychic energy generated by the transformed beings suffering." Elena felt her internal fire respond to the surge of anger that washed through her. The flames didn't manifest visibly, but the temperature on the bridge rose by several degrees. Over the months, she had learned to channel her abilities with surgical precision, but the thought of the Void Maker's cruelty still tested her control. "Then we make this quick and clean," she decided. "Alpha teams take the feeding stations. I want those dimensional rifts sealed before the Void Makers can respond. Beta teams handle the isolated shepherds. Remember, these beings have been tortured for centuries. They're going to be afraid and confused when we begin the restoration process." Throughout the fleet, the members of the Draconic Guard prepared for battle in ways that would have seemed like magic to their ancestors. Each warrior meditated on the flame within, stoking the ancient fires that slept in human DNA. Some manifested their abilities as controllable plasma that could cut through any material. Others generated protective barriers of pure energy that could deflect weapons powerful enough to crack planets. A few, like Elena herself, had learned to manipulate reality at the quantum level, editing the fundamental forces that held the universe together. The transformation of humanity had not gone unnoticed by the other galactic powers. The Corallian Empire had formally requested military advisors to help them understand human capabilities. The Zephyrian Confederation had offered full technological exchange in hopes of developing hybrid weapons that could channel human fire abilities. Even the reclusive, ethereal collective had emerged from their dimensional sanctuaries to study what they called the awakening of the Dragon Touched. But it was the response of the rescued celestial shepherds that had proven most significant. As each transformed being was restored to its original form, the galaxy gained access to knowledge that had been lost for millennia. The shepherds remembered techniques for healing dead worlds, for nurturing life in the most hostile environments, and for defending against threats that existed beyond the normal boundaries of space and time. HFY, the first shepherd Elena had rescued, had become her closest advisor and friend. The ancient being's wisdom, combined with humanity's newfound abilities, had proven to be a formidable combination. Through their psychic link, Elena could access memories spanning thousands of years, learning from civilizations that had risen and fallen before humanity had even developed agriculture. Commander, Zephai's voice resonated in Elena's mind, carrying the complex harmonics that characterized Shepherd communication. I sense great pain from the coordinates you have designated as primary targets. The suffering of my people has been used to tear holes between dimensions. The Void Makers are preparing something significant. Elena's jaw tightened. Any idea what they're planning? The memories are fragmented, but I sense a gathering. They have been harvesting psychic energy for centuries, storing it in dimensional batteries that exist outside normal space-time. If they have collected enough power, they may be preparing to manifest physically in our reality. The implications sent a chill through Elena that had nothing to do with temperature. The Void Makers had remained safely hidden in the spaces between dimensions, operating through proxies and transformed victims. If they were preparing to enter normal space directly, it meant they believed they had accumulated enough power to challenge the combined might of the galactic civilizations. All teams, priority update. Elena broadcast across the fleet communication system. Intelligence suggests that today's operations may trigger a direct response from the Void Makers themselves. Be prepared for anything, and remember, our primary objective is rescue and restoration. If we encounter hostile entities, our job is to protect the shepherds and get them clear. The fire burns strongest when we fight to save others, not to destroy our enemies. The response was immediate and unanimous. 50,000 human voices acknowledging her orders, while 50,000 internal flames burned brighter with purpose. Elena felt a moment of almost overwhelming pride in her species. They had come so far from the fragile beings that other races had mocked just months earlier. The first phase of the operation unfolded with clockwork precision. Strike teams materialized at each target location simultaneously, their abilities allowing them to bypass conventional defenses entirely. The transformed shepherds, still trapped in their perverted forms as Void Reapers, initially responded with programmed aggression. But as Elena's people began the restoration process, the artificial modifications began to dissolve under the influence of human fire. At the first feeding station, Team Alpha 7 encountered something unexpected. The dimensional rift that should have led to empty space was instead filled with a writhing mass of shadows that seemed to absorb light itself. From within the darkness, voices spoke in harmonics that hurt to hear, promising power and knowledge to anyone willing to serve the entities that dwelt between worlds. Commander, reported team leader Sarah Martinez, her voice tight with strain as she maintained a barrier of flame between her squad and the dimensional intrusion. We've got active Void Maker presence at Station 1. They're trying to communicate through the rift. Elena felt her abilities surge in response to the threat against her people. Do not engage in conversation with them. Sarah, seal that rift now. Whatever they're offering, the price isn't worth paying. But even as she gave the order, Elena could feel the Void Maker's attention turning toward her across the impossible distances of folded space. They had noticed the rescue operations, and, more importantly, they had noticed the humans responsible for disrupting their plans. The psychic contact, when it came, was unlike anything Elena had experienced. The Void Maker's consciousness pressed against her mind like a tide of cold starlight, carrying whispers of civilizations that had willingly embraced the darkness between worlds. Firebearer, the voices said, their words bypassing her ears entirely and appearing directly in her thoughts. You burn so brightly. Such potential wasted on mere rescue. We could teach you to burn entire stars, to remake reality according to your will. The dragons that sleep in your blood remember us. They remember when they served willingly in the spaces between light. Elena's response was immediate and uncompromising. Her internal fire roared to life with an intensity that surprised even her, burning away the alien intrusion with prejudice. My ancestors may have known you, she snarled, her voice carrying harmonics that made nearby bulkheads vibrate sympathetically. But they chose to burn for life, not destruction. We are not our ancestors' fears made manifest. We are their hopes fulfilled. The recoil from her rejection sent shockwaves through the dimensional fabric surrounding all 17 target locations. Every member of the Draconic Guard felt it, their own abilities responding to Elena's defiance with sympathetic resonance. Across the fleet, human fires burned brighter than they ever had before, fueled by shared purpose and absolute conviction. The effect on the rescued shepherds was immediate and dramatic. Instead of the gradual restoration process that had become standard, the artificial modifications holding them in their perverted forms simply evaporated under the wash of purifying flame. Dozens of celestial shepherds returned to their true forms simultaneously, their psychic voices joining together in a harmony that hadn't been heard in the galaxy for thousands of years. But the Voidmaker's response was equally swift and far more dangerous. Dimensional rifts began opening throughout known space, not just at the target locations, but at major population centers across a dozen different star systems. From these tears in reality came creatures that defied description, beings of living shadow and crystallized despair that began draining the life energy from everything they encountered. All teams abort rescue operations and return to fleet positions, Elena ordered, her mind racing through tactical possibilities. We've got multiple dimensional incursions across the galaxy. The Voidmakers have decided to make their move. As the Draconic Guard regrouped, reports began flooding in from across known space. The Corallian homeworld was under attack by entities that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Zephyrian colonies were being drained of life by creatures that fed on hope itself. Even a mighty Aquarian defense fleet was struggling against opponents that couldn't be damaged by conventional weapons. Elena stood in the center of her command bridge, feeling the weight of the entire galaxy's expectations settling on her shoulders. Around her, rescued shepherds added their voices to the growing psychic network that connected all the freed beings. Through their combined memories, she could see the true scope of the Voidmaker's plan. They've been preparing this for millennia. Zephi informed her, the ancient being's thoughts heavy with sorrow and determination. Every transformed shepherd, every act of cruelty and perversion has been building toward this moment. They mean to drain the life from our reality itself, using our galaxy as fuel for their transition from the spaces between worlds into physical existence. Elena nodded grimly, but when she spoke, her voice carried absolute confidence. Then, it's time they learned what humans do when someone threatens our galaxy. She opened a communication channel that reached every member of the Draconic Guard simultaneously, her words carrying across space through quantum entanglement fields maintained by their shared abilities. My friends, my family, my fellow guardians, she began, her voice somehow reaching each listener as if she were standing beside them personally. Today we face an enemy that believes they can extinguish the light of civilization itself. They have spent centuries torturing innocent beings to fuel their invasion of our reality. They think that because we were once considered weak, we will break when faced with their full power. Across the galaxy, 50,000 human warriors felt their internal fires respond to Elena's words, each flame burning in perfect harmony with all the others. The quantum resonance field they created began affecting reality at fundamental levels, strengthening the barriers between dimensions while simultaneously making it easier for human abilities to manifest. They're wrong, Elena continued, her own flame now visible as a golden aura that made her appear to glow with internal starlight. We are not the fragile species they believe us to be. We are the children of dragons, the inheritors of flame that burns not to destroy, but to protect. And today we're going to remind the universe what happens when you threaten something a human has decided to defend. The battle for the galaxy's soul began with a roar of defiance that echoed across dimensional barriers and made the Void Makers pause in their assault. For the first time in their existence, they faced an enemy that burned brighter when confronted with impossible odds, warriors whose strength grew in proportion to the stakes of their fight. In the years that followed, bards and historians would struggle to find adequate words to describe what became known as the War of Burning Shadows. They would speak of humans who fought creatures of living nightmare with nothing but their will and the ancient fire that slept in their blood. They would tell of Elena Vasquez, who faced down entities older than galaxies and refused to be cowed by their threats of cosmic annihilation. But, perhaps most importantly, they would remember that when all other lights had failed, when the forces of entropy and despair had seemed certain to triumph, humanity had chosen to burn brighter rather than surrender to the darkness. The galaxy had finally learned the true meaning of the phrase that would echo through the ages. Humanity, F******, yeah. The war was far from over, but its outcome was no longer in doubt. The dragons had awakened, and they would not sleep again until every last shadow had been driven back to the spaces between worlds where it belonged.